Got it. Cool. So hey y'all, my name's Lovey Cooper. I'm managing editor with Scalawag, which is a journalism and storytelling organization that tells untold stories from and about the South. You are here for the Prison Guidebook training. It's a guidebook that Scalawag put together that I worked on with the two other lovely folks that you will hear from today, Danielle Purifoy and Emily Nonko, who are amazing people to work with in general, but have also done amazing work in this space of working with incarcerated writers. Emily works with Empowerment Avenue, and Danielle was Scalawag's former Race and Place editor, founding Race and Place editor, I should say. Yeah, so we put together this guidebook, took several months last year. And you know, we just got done right now this year with a project that we've done every year since 2020 that we call Abolition Week, which is a week that Scalawag only publishes work by system impacted contributors, both in hopes of shedding light on, you know, what's going on behind bars in this country, and to point readers in the direction of, you know, understanding what prison abolition actually means, and also as a way to intentionally kind of recenter some of these voices that have been very intentionally left out of the media dialogue. And so just for like a little bit more background about how we came to put together this guidebook, was that after we did Abolition Week for a couple of years, you know, publishing those stories, we put together this guidebook for other newsrooms to do the same, for a few reasons. And one of them, the major reason being that we wanted to see more people doing this kind of work, you know, publishing more reporting and storytelling from folks in prison. You know, from talking to our contributors and finding folks to write for us, we saw that there were very few publications kind of outside of those that bill themselves as like, you know, this is prison news, prison-centered outlets. There were very few people that kind of, you know, knew what it looked like to meaningfully create space in their news cycles for incarcerated folks, and even fewer people who knew how to do that, and also just literally what to do to carry out the tasks that come with publishing folks from the inside. I wrote in the intro to the guidebook, which we've got the link to the full PDF in the chat here. Wrote in the intro about, you know, how from just a numbers perspective, if the sum of everyone in prison in America was a city, it would be the fifth largest city in America. And so when you think about that from an abolitionist framework or not, just as a journalist, it's kind of staggering that there's such a huge segment of our population that isn't represented in the news. You know, the example I used last time was like, it'd be wild if we talked this long about COVID in America as a whole, but only talked about how it was playing out in Chicago, you know, a couple of times when we got some sort of state-sponsored outside records about it, right? So kind of approaching it with that framework, but also, I don't know, everyone in the room, if y'all are, you know, editors, writers, freelancers, whatever, but you know, editors in general don't really think about the ways that folks are cut off from the business of freelance writing and what the reporting landscape looks like, you know, no matter where they are, just as a normal freelancer, right? And you know, how those folks might not have the resources that they need for professional development, or, you know, to get a pitch up to the standards that you're looking for or whatever. We don't really think about that a lot. That goes double for folks who are writing, you know, under extreme restrictions. And then, you know, for folks who are freelancers, you know, imagine if you submitted your work somewhere and never heard back about why an outlet wouldn't publish you, you know, if it was the wrong tone or the wrong timing or something else about your language, and you never learned or heard back and couldn't figure out how to repitch or whatever. And so another reason why we put together this guidebook is because we wanted an excuse to get better at all of this ourselves. You know, there wasn't a guide out there that was this comprehensive, and you know, that's wild to think about on its own. And because we also know that this guide isn't 100% comprehensive, so we intend to keep building on it. We hope that everyone here helps us take on that work of building on it. We have a listserv of folks who attended the first round of trainings that we did from this guidebook, which I will drop the link in the chat on how to join that. But yeah, we've got like over 400 folks who have either attended a past training or have downloaded the guidebook since then, and it's a great way to keep in touch with each other. So yeah, thank you all for being here. Thanks to Emily and Danielle and Rasan and Lyle, who you'll hear recordings or call in from in a bit. And thanks to the whole Scalawag team, especially Virginia Walcott, who is not here, but who did the beautiful layout for the guidebook that I always want to hype up, featuring artwork from incarcerated artists too. I'll put all of the links that I just mentioned in the chat in a bit. And given the size of this group, this can be as participatory as you want it to be. Feel free to chime in and ask questions. And yeah, I will pass it over.
Here's a quick look at our schedule. Yeah, we'll do some brief introductions, I guess, to get started. Thank you so much, Lovey. I'm Emily Nonco, and I'm a freelance journalist and a organizer with Empowerment Avenue. Empowerment Avenue is a program envisioned by my friend Rasan Thomas, who's an incarcerated journalist at San Quentin State Prison. Incarcerated people have no access to internet or email. So as you can imagine, it's very difficult to grow your writing career from inside. So we had envisioned one-on-one partnerships between inside and outside writers and editors to help facilitate the publication of work from incarcerated writers in mainstream media. So Rasan will be his voice will be here with us, sharing some insight, but I'm really excited to dig in, and then I'll pass to Danielle.
Hi, everyone. Just quickly, I'm Danielle Purefoy. I use she or they pronouns. As Lovey said, I was the Race and Place editor, former Race and Place editor for Scalawag. And in that role, I worked with an incarcerated writer on death row in North Carolina named Lyle May, who is a phenomenal writer, really great journalist for about 4 years. And Lyle has pieces in the guidebook, and you will hear from him in about 15 minutes. Yeah, it's been one of the most just to write like amazing kinds of work partnerships that I've learned a ton, and most importantly, solidified, right, all of my abolitionist ambitions for our world. So yeah, I'm really glad to be here, and thank you all for joining today.
Cool. So we'll get started. Oh, why this work matters. Lovey went through that already. And we're going to get started with some do's and don'ts. Just some lessons that I think with our work with Empowerment Avenue, we pulled out to distill as simply as possible. So we're kind of going to go through that with Rasan's recordings. And then at the end, we'll have discussion and questions. So if anything comes up now, make a note and we can talk about it at the end of the panel. One big thing that we found we've had to emphasize at the ground level is dehumanizing language used for incarcerated folks. And this is a huge issue we see in media and how incarcerated folks are covered. We also saw editors inserting dehumanizing language in reporting that incarcerated people were submitting. So this is something that Rasan has taken on, and I'm going to let him take it away here.
Reporters agonize over word choice. We get all of our thesauruses out and try to find the perfect word to convey meaning at the same time while maintaining objectivity. And I think that we have a blind spot, or some reporters have a blind spot when it comes to incarcerated people. We use language that is not objective, that's not the right words. And for instance, recently I was featured in the San Francisco Chronicle for the possibility of getting a commutation. And a reporter said that I was a murderer who became a journalist, and he touted all the accolades from being a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize and college work and all this stuff. And this call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. 21 years, but he still referred to me as an inmate, which dehumanized me, and he called me a murderer, which sounds present tense. And my personal opinion is that you don't give a murderer a commutation. And if you bake one cake, that doesn't make you a baker. You know what I mean? I made my mom a cake when I was like 6. It didn't come out good. I never baked another cake again, and nobody keeps calling me a baker. And I wasn't, murder's not your career choice. Killing one person doesn't necessarily make you a murderer, especially after 20 years of hard work and change, right? And so I think it's very important to remain objective when you're doing stories. And when you use the word like inmate, that's the word of the state. That's the word that the state needs you to use the state needs to use in order to dehumanize you and do their job, which is to keep you in house inside of a cell, no matter what should be the cost of your life or whatever. You might have a mental health issue, but if you've been convicted and thrown in prison, they have to put you in a cell. You might be innocent, but if you've been convicted and sent to prison, they got to house you in a cell, and they have to ignore how they really feel about it. They have to be to treat you like anybody else that's in prison. They have to treat you like nothing. They have to treat you like an inmate. And so when you're a newspaper reporter and you're using this word, it's a very destructive word. It's a very destructive label. If you think about it, the destruction of every group of people started with a word. Started with a simple name change, a simple dehumanizing tag. And that's how it got other people of good conscience moving along with the destruction of everyday human beings. And when we don't see the people in prison as human beings, we miss the fact that the root cause of the crime are really some human stuff. That bars are never going to settle. Bars are never going to fix. The root cause of crime are like social injustices and poverty and racism, and trauma. And you don't get to that if you keep calling us dehumanizing names. You support the narratives of the state. And so I firmly recommend reading a book called The Lucifer Effect by Philip Zimbardo. I firmly recommend studying history, the destruction of a people from Rwanda, from Nazi Germany, from slavery, and look at the power of names and labels. And please be objective as a journalist and don't use labels that you know are wrong. All right? Reporters agonize over word choice.
Sorry. There we go. So we pulled the article example that Rasan is referring to that was published in the San Francisco Chronicle. And I think this is an example of how mainstream media perpetuates certain narratives and certain language, especially when they don't have impacted folks on staff or even freelancing meaningfully for them. And we also included Rasan has done quite a lot of writing about dehumanizing word choice and how we can improve that in media. So that's just one example of an article here that I really recommend you check out and hear more from him on this. This is another issue that we've run into quite a bit. I know journalists are always on tight deadlines. We exist in a fast-paced news cycle, but that is not the timeline that incarcerated writers are able to work on given restrictions in communication. So I've seen that there's an assumption sometimes from editors that you can just plop the existing structures of publication on an incarcerated person, and it just doesn't work. So a lot of the things that come out as demands when you're publishing, which we've outlined here, I think can be reframed. I think a question is always better, asking what a writer's reality is, what sort of time frame they're working on, if they even have access to photography inside. That's very uncommon, so we might not have photos for you to use. Also, the insistence that journalists need to include their convictions with their bios, I think is something that should be very open for discussion and pushback. So I always encourage from editors a perspective of openness, curiosity, and conversation as opposed to demands within the work. When we started Empowerment Avenue, pay was a crucial component. Rasan saw that a lot of the creative work that made it outside the walls just wasn't getting compensated, which reflects a larger lack of priority that we put in incarcerated people's labor. So don't assume payment isn't important, and I'm gonna let Rasan tell you more.
Getting paid is super important in prison because a lot of people in here have no one looking out for them, and the average prison job pays less than $36 a month. And some months they forget to pay you, and you have to get it like another month or two later. And so if you don't have money, when the canteen comes around, you can't buy stamps. You can't get food. And so people are counting on this. Imagine like being free, or you are free, but imagine you guys out there, your only source of income is this job, and you live paycheck to paycheck. And if you don't get your check to pay your rent, you're homeless. If you don't get your check to buy food, you don't eat that week. That's how it is for people in prison. If we don't get the money, we have no other source of income. We can't buy groceries. We can't even buy stamps to write you back. And so it's very important that people in prison are economically compensated and in a timely fashion. And so it's also important for them to be able to plan when they can go shopping and when they can order a package, because there's all these time constraints. Like you go to canteen once a month or on one particular day, and you get one package every 90 days and all this complicated stuff that they need to be able to navigate. And just simply knowing if the money's coming and when the money's coming is very important so they can figure that stuff out for themselves and plan ahead and know how they have to stretch their resources. And so please take consideration to pay incarcerated people. Also, incarcerated people have families out there. They want to be able to help take care of their families. And they also don't want to be a burden on their families. They want to be able to take care of themselves. They want to be able to access justice. They want to be able to save for retirement. They want to be able to save to come home to be successful upon reentry. And so not just paying them for the moment, but like thinking about like helping incarcerated people build wealth is very important, because most people are in prison for money-related crimes. And if you have a positive way to make money, and a negative way just doesn't make sense to you. But when you're desperate things start making sense no matter how stupid they are.
All right.
Getting paid is super.
Sorry. Another quick thing that we're going to talk more about is don't forget the risks incarcerated writers tell to do this work. I've included a quote we have in the guidebook from incarcerated journalist Chris Blackwell. And just emphasizing that editing and changing the meaning of the work can really put a risk on incarcerated journalists. Chris sometimes refers to this work as reporting in a war zone. So just something to keep in mind. It's something that we're going to be talking further throughout the panel. Education is really important. We've tried to help you with the guidebook. Communication is a huge thing to learn, how incarcerated people are able to communicate with the outside world. You cannot do this work without knowing. And just knowing about the system and how the system works, as well as the incredible history of prison journalism and how this work carries on, and the importance of this work in American history and organizing history and journalistic history. Another big thing we've seen at newsrooms where editors and reporters advocate for resources and get buy-in in their newsrooms is where we see the most success. This work takes time, and to have the buy-in is going to make a lot of difference. And we love to think of the work as relationship building. That's what makes it all worth it. And I'll give it to Rasan.
The most valuable thing that I have is relationships. Relationships are the most valuable thing you can have. In fact, the opposite of relationships is isolation. And isolation is a root cause of crime. Because if you live in isolation, then you believe that nobody cares about you, and then you don't care about anybody. And that makes you capable of stuff that shouldn't be happening, right? And so one of the most powerful things the Empowerment Avenue does is build relationships. You know, it's not just about like hooking up people in prison with writers outside so they can make money, or it's about like building these relationships, because these social connections are powerful both ways. The writers themselves, they feel like society supports them. And when you feel like you're supported by society, you become loyal to society. When society felt like it was isolating you and it was against you, and nobody wanted you and nobody cared about you, you gravitated towards a gang. And this gang did not really care about you, but it felt like they did. And so you did stupid things for this gang. But once you're accepted by society, and you realize society has your best interest at heart, and you become loyal to society. That becomes your group. That becomes who you care about. That becomes who you become loyal to. And that's how we can become citizens and make this world better for everybody, right? I think that the volunteers get so much out of it as well. They get so much insight and wisdom from us. I mean, we learn to deal with the most unbearable circumstances and stand tall, where the average person is crying about a parking ticket. You know what I mean? So I think these relationships are twofold, right? We learn so much from each other, and as far as incarcerated person, when you have these relationships, it gets you past the felony on your rap sheet. Because the best way to get a job, to be honest, is by who you know.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
And when you know people in the right places and you have the skills, these people can vouch for you, like, this person's amazing, they have the skills, he's somebody you should seriously consider hiring, I recommend them. Despite his felony, he did so much work for prison and yada, 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 right? And so it's a way of reintegrating back into society before you even get there. It's a way of society being introduced into incarcerated people and the root causes of it, right? And a lot of it is really just stuff we all go through, man. We all go through trauma, we all have bad days. But like the way some incarcerated people have learned to deal with it is really amazing.
And we really emphasize that people should get excited to do this work. This work has been life-changing for me. I've seen it be life-changing for the editors who invest in it. I've seen the results of this work, and I can't wait to sort of continue the conversation with everybody here about how we can further invest and collaborate. I'm a little over time, so sorry. I'm going to pass it to Danielle, who's going to talk about retaliation, and we're going to have a call-in soon from Lyle May.
Right. Thanks so much, Emily. And again, thanks to everyone for being here. I'm going to touch a little bit before Lyle calls in. I think we messaged him to let him know that we're running just a few minutes behind. But I want to first give you an introduction to Lyle, and then we'll talk a little bit more sort of building off of what Emily has talked about in terms of the risks, right, to incarcerated writers of doing this kind of work. So Lyle May is a prison journalist, an abolitionist. He's an Ohio University alumni. He's a member of the Alpha Sigma Lambda Honor Society. He is currently on death row in North Carolina and is pursuing every legal avenue to overturn his conviction and death sentence. Lyle's work really spans the gamut, but he has really worked mostly as an advocate for higher education in prisons, but he's done this really fabulous journalism work about the consequences of writing, being an incarcerated journalist. He's done a lot of analysis of legal cases that a lot of us, that the media construes in one way, and that he has a very different interpretation of. I think of him as someone who has a law background, as a really amazing legal scholar. And he is also working on publishing a book right now that is a collection of a lot of the work that he has done over the past 5 to 6 years, including some work that he and I worked together on while I was his editor at Scalawag. So thank you, Emily. In the Press and Prisons Guide, Lyle wrote an article about the risks of being a journalist, an incarcerated journalist. And he used an example of an article he published in Scalawag that resulted in retaliation directly from prison officials, which landed him some time in solitary confinement. And as you can read here, led to a ransacking, right, in search of his cell. And those are, just some of the consequences that are facing, that incarcerated writers face. And part of the objective of writing this piece was to give folks a how-to guide about how to be in solidarity in these moments when you are working with incarcerated writers. Great, that's one step, right? But having their back is actually a really huge part of ensuring that the work is sustainable and ensuring that you can mitigate, right, against retaliation. And the best way to do that is to keep, right, the pressure on prison officials in the public eye, and which is something that I think a lot of media outlets have not been very good about, to the extent that they work with incarcerated writers at all. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the very practical steps that editors and various media outlets can take to mitigate retaliation, to prevent it from happening. As Lyle says in the guide, just saying, please stop, right? In some private letter to a prison official will not be enough. There's, one best practice is to actually have a practice at all, to anticipate that there will be some forms of retaliation, because oftentimes, right, what the media, prison officials have very robust, right, PR divisions, right, communications divisions to shape the story about incarceration to the public. And by and large, the media takes up that version of the story. And so working directly with incarcerated writers means that a counter narrative is being advanced in these media outlets, which is really important, right? It's like the minimum that we can do, but it's very important. And so we have to anticipate, right, that there's going to be backlash. And so one of the best things that you can do as a media organization is to create practices to preempt and defend against retaliation, to anticipate that it will happen and have a practice in place for what you do when it happens. The next thing you can do is and part of those practices can include things like letting incarcerated writers know upfront, right? When you're starting relationships, that you will support their work and that you check in with them regularly. As Rasan said, right, this is all about building relationships. Editors, media outlets shouldn't necessarily have transactional relationships with any writers that they work with. But when you're working with folks who are literally risking their lives to write their truths, it is really important, right, that you value the relationship beyond just the transaction of publishing their work. So that means calling them regularly, even when they're not, right, writing something for you, to check in, because the consequences of their writing and whatever else they may be holding, right, extend far beyond publication. Calling out retaliating officials every time, not just when convenient. This is something that Lyle says specifically in the guide, that you cannot afford, right, to be sometimey, right, when you do this, and which is why it's important to actually have a practice, right, that everyone is aware of in your media organization of what happens when retaliation happens, so that it happens every time, it happens consistently, and you keep that retaliation out in the public eye, and that places the pressure, right, on prison officials to step back, right. It lets you know that you are standing in solidarity with incarcerated writers, and you will not tolerate, right, their squashing, right, of incarcerated writers' speech. Use all available and appropriate channels of communication. We communicate in every possible way, right, in this era, and incarcerated writers only have a few, right, and shifting, right, levels of access to communication. Use all of the tools that we have at our disposal as people who are not incarcerated, right, to not only, right, publish, right, the words of incarcerated writers and the voices of incarcerated writers, but also our support, right, for them when and if retaliation happens, right? So pick up the phone, right? Use social media, get to writing yourself, right, about these sort of impacts. Lawsuits are a common way that people try to intervene, and they're not necessarily the best way, but don't be afraid to use that tactic too. But the communications are really critical. And then also, Lyle is calling here, give the public and your readership clear instructions on how they can support the fight to free the press in prison. Okay, I am letting Lyle in to the room, and we're going to talk about another a recent example of media not actually really working well with incarcerated writers or voices.
This call, press 5 now to decline this call. Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
Hello.
Hi, Lyle. How's it going?
How's it going?
It's all right. It's all right. How you feeling?
I'm okay.
Yeah, cool. So we have you live in the session. We got a pretty cool and intimate group of folks here in the workshop. And I just finished going through some part of the points that you were making in the guide about how media outlets can work with incarcerated writers to prevent retaliation or at least to mitigate retaliation. And I want to, but I want to be mindful of your time and the conversation we wanted to have today, which is about, and I haven't queued it up yet. So if you just give me a second to just tell folks like what what's going on, so because we're kind of shifting topics, but we're going to talk today about some of the barriers, right, that media put in place to prevent incarcerated people generally, and also, right, including incarcerated writers, from actually voicing opinions or perspectives on matters that actually they have directly experienced, right? And this is again towards the empowering and privileging, right, and prioritization of the voices of the people who are in this particular case, people who, you know, work on the county commission, right, or prison officials, right, over the voices of folks who are directly impacted by the carceral state. So just as a brief background, in Durham, North Carolina, where Scalawag is headquartered and where I live, I work with a formation called Durham Beyond Policing, which is an abolitionist formation that's seeking to create new systems of safety in the city and county of Durham. And one of the campaigns that we've been working on for the last year is against a $30 million new youth jail that the county, Durham County government has allocated this money to build, despite the fact that, right, we know that incarceration doesn't work, and also despite the fact that youth incarceration has actually plummeted over the last decade. So they're wanting to expand youth incarceration at this moment in a way that even if you weren't an abolitionist, doesn't make any sense. But of course, if you're an abolitionist, right, you absolutely don't want. And so when I told Lyle about this case, about this fight, he asked how he could help. And I said, well, maybe write a letter. And did he ever write a letter? He wrote this really beautiful letter to the Durham County Commission. And it was signed by 9 other men on his block, who had, all of whom had been incarcerated as youth. Right, so you're talking about people who are directly impacted by this system, wanting to voice, right, their particular perspectives from their experiences about youth incarceration as a way to to help to shape this decision, which is what the media is supposed to be about. And so I want to bring Lyle into conversation. Now, the slide that you're looking at right now, folks, is and edited, it was from an edited version of that letter that Lyle sent to the county commission that was published in Youth Today, in which, and so that was the only, right, version of this letter that was able to see the light of day in the media. So Lyle, I guess what I wanted to start with is, why did you say yes when I asked you about the letter? Why was this important for you?
Well, I always try to take every opportunity that I can to speak out about mass incarceration and the different elements of it. And it begins with the juvenile justice system. Once a child or a teenager or a kid gets involved in that justice system, it sets them on a fast track to ultimately become members of the criminal legal system. And I hate to describe it like that, but it's almost too easy to get involved, to get justice involved as an adult. But as a child, it destroys your ability to become an adult in society who can have all the opportunities that would normally be afforded to anyone else. And when you are a member of a group that is unfairly and disproportionately targeted for incarceration, as Black, brown, indigenous people of color are, or the mentally ill, or the poor, or the homeless, then you're at a double disadvantage. So I felt it necessary to speak out about that, because not only have I experienced it, but a number of my peers have. So much so that it behooves me to speak out against it. But also because as somebody who considers himself a journalist and wants to cover this topic in a way that is not covered by various other mainstream media outlets, it's very necessary for me to write about it in any way that I can, through any avenue that I can.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. I mean, I think in the letter, I mean, folks read the Youth Today article as one version of it. There are a couple of versions of it at this point, but the letter really wonderfully, right, like lays out all the kinds of systems, right, that we could actually put in place to support youth, right, instead of, right, investing more in the in youth incarceration. And so, you know, the Youth Today article came out. And I don't know if you want to say a little bit, Lyle, about like that process, you know, what that process was like for you, sort of trying to edit your original letter to the Durham County Commission for this piece for Youth Today. I don't know if you want to spend time talking about that. We have plenty of other things we can talk about, but yeah, I thought it might be a good place to start.
Well, I can tell you, just this was the first experience that I had editing a piece and working with an editor at a different place, where I was able to change the piece in real time over the tablet. Because for those of you who are not aware, North Carolina over the last couple of years has implemented the tablets in its prisons, and Central Prison just received its tablets in, I think it was the same week of Easter. So this was my first opportunity to really kind of edit something on the fly on a piece of technology that was not in existence 25 years ago. Something that I'm getting acclimated to as quickly as I possibly can, because it is a tool that can advance my ability to communicate with the public. And like it is now, I'm talking to you on my tablet in my room. So this is kind of a new experience for me. But I also recognize that I don't have time to kind of be starry-eyed about it. I need to be able to, you know, use it in such a way to, like I said, advance these issues. So in editing this piece with Caddy Gray, I believe is her name, from youthtoday.org, it, you know, was not too difficult. Normally, I would have to wait a couple weeks to receive editorial feedback. She was able to clarify things relatively quickly and was able to get it done in a matter of hours instead of a matter of weeks. So that was pretty interesting, and I was happy to be able to do that for the first time, and certainly look forward to be doing it more.
Yeah, that's it's game changing. And I will say, as someone who's also been trying to communicate with Lyle in real time, that it doesn't always work for everyone in terms of, you know, I've been trying to get on the messaging service to be able to direct message Lyle for a couple of months now. And I can't, you know, Lovey is able to get through, which is great, right? Because Lovey is working with Lyle more regularly than I am now, but it is spotty at best in terms of who all is able to communicate. But yeah, it is a real game changer. And at least I can receive messages from Lyle, but I can't send them. And that's been, it's been really useful to just be able to kind of hear from him in the kind of in between times between phone calls. So we're still, Lyle and I are still reliant on the phone call system, but we'll get there at some point with the messaging. We'll just have to figure out some other way. So I want to just, right. I want to just pivot so the Youth Today article came out, but there were like two other, right, like attempts, no, three other attempts to communicate Lyle's letter and this in perspective, right, about the youth jail. And mind you, this is during the budget fight. This is the budget hearing process that the county commission is putting forward to make the final decision to move forward with this jail. And we tried an op-ed in the flagship newspaper in North Carolina, the Raleigh News and Observer. We tried an interview with our NPR affiliate, WUNC, and then with a local news broadcast outlet, pretty much sure it was CBS 17. And we had mishaps in each one of those instances. So Lyle, I just want to invite you to talk, say a bit more about what that experience was like and what it actually means in terms of these sort of media barriers to actual public discourse about these really important issues.
I don't know that I characterize them as mishaps, but controlled narratives that are very much intentional on the part of editors who okay what stories make it through and what stories don't.
Mm-hmm.
Hello?
Yep, still here.
Oh, okay. So with the WUNC interview, when Leonida Inge interviewed me, I thought it went well. I made sure to stay on topic about the youth jail, and it still seems critical to get people to understand why building a $30 million youth confinement facility is not a good idea. And then when I had a similar conversation with Crystal Price of CBS 17 News, I also thought it went well. Maybe not as good as the WUNC interview, but still very much on topic and very much a necessary conversation. Yet the WUNC interview never aired, and I don't recall there being any mention of the budget at all on WUNC. And then when CBS 17 had a 2-minute clip on, I think it was the 4:30, it might have been after 5 o'clock news, it was about youth incarceration, but nothing about Durham County, nothing about the youth jail, and nothing about the budget. Now, with the News and Observer, which is a local paper in Raleigh and in Charlotte, there was an article about the commission and their budget, but there again was no mention of the youth jail. Now, not wanting to take this as a conspiracy, I try to keep an open mind about the purpose. Well, one of the reasons we were given by WUNC for them not airing it.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Hold up, I'll call back.
Yeah, just call back. Okay.
Was that they had already interviewed some families from people who are incarcerated in Durham County who were youth. I don't believe we were ever given a reason by CBS 17. Hold on.
Okay. Lyle's just going to call back. He can only talk at 15 minutes at a time. And when he comes back, we'll wrap up what he has to say about this, and we'll open it up for some questions since he's on we're always on prison time, essentially, right? So just to give y'all some space to ask questions if you want. Well, what I will say is that the other media outlet that we tried was the Raleigh News and Observer to publish an op-ed about this. And despite having at least one editor, newish editor, young editor who actually came from the UNC School of Journalism, had been just really amazing at trying to push the envelope about the sort of things that the News and Observer, which is a fairly conservative newspaper, publishes. When we submitted the op-ed, you know, she messaged me and was like, "This is great. I'm going to fight as hard as I can to get this published." And ultimately, it, yeah, they killed that as well. So yeah, so several different attempts to get this out, and there were no incarcerated people, right, other than Lyle, you know, submitting his letter to the county commission, who had any, right, any input, right, any conversation or any perspective, right, like lent to this particular issue. And it's, whatever you think about prisons, it's terrible journalism, right? Just awful journalism to just say, well, there's a new youth jail being built, and the presumption is that, of course, it needs to be built, and you know, and of course, it needs to be as large as it is, and there's no actual critical inquiry. And when there is no critical inquiry, then the county commission becomes essentially, right, these decision makers become essentially the mouthpiece for the media. So, okay, here's Lyle again, he's calling back.
You have a prepaid call. You will not be charged for this call. This call is from
Lyle May.
an inmate at Central Prison. This call will be monitored and recorded. For customer assistance, collection, or complaint procedures, or to block future calls, dial 1-866-230-7761. To accept this call, press 5 now. To decline, thank you for using Global Tel Link.
Hey. All right. I was, yeah, so welcome back. I was just telling folks about the News and Observer thing just to fill folks in. But yeah, go ahead and keep going. Sorry, if you can remember all what you're saying.
So with the News and Observer, there was one article written about the Durham County Commissioner's approval of the new fiscal year budget. It was written by Mark Schultz, and he does detail some of the spending for nearly $1 billion. It's $794 million for one county spending plan. And out of that money, there's discussion about $75 million spent for law enforcement and $11 million spent for teachers and schools. But there is zero mention of the $30 million that is spent for this youth jail. And that seems like a pretty substantial omission from an article about one county's budget, especially when you consider, combined with the youth jail and law enforcement, you're spending $105 million on the criminal legal system and a tenth of that to educate kids. I find that problematic. And I think if it was presented like that in the news, a lot of people would find that problematic. So the fact that that was not covered by any local media, it really does not look good. One, you could say it's journalists dropping a ball, but well, we can't really say that because I was interviewed by two of them. So then it becomes the responsibility of the editors at these outlets who are intentionally foregoing coverage of the topic of the youth jail. And that's a problem because it's not just this youth jail that it happens. When you consider over the last several years that in North Carolina, there have been substantial problems with county jails and deaths and hidden records, the fact that they would not cover building a brand new jail, there's something there. There is a there. But we don't know what that is because, well, I'm one guy in prison writing about my experiences and those of my peers. And this is where it is very critical for others in prisons to be able to relate their experiences and it be covered by the media and it be, given a fair hearing. And that's really all any of us can ask for is a fair hearing. And that's not even happening right now. So, and I mentioned earlier, that I wouldn't consider it conspiratorial, but there is a history of the media and creating moral panics around crime from reporting on crime. And lo and behold, not even 2 weeks after this article that was during the commission's budget was published, there is a 7-page front section article about cold cases and notorious crimes of people who have been put on death row. And I find it problematic that it's easier to focus on the tried and true, if it bleeds, it leads reporting, as opposed to the reporting that can effectively change a system so that it works toward public safety.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off. Did you? Okay.
No, I didn't want to run on.
Oh, no, that's not running off. Thank you so much. And just actually, to that point, just a quick shout out to Scalawag's new work on, what's it called? Like Pop Justice. Just this really lovely, you might want to say something about it a little later, but like, like really taking up how the media, right? Like, and not just media, like news media, but also popular media, right? It takes up the criminal legal system, your Law and Orders, your cops shows, and all of those sort of things. So shout out to Scalawag's work on that. That's exactly in line with, what Lyle is talking about right now. Lyle, is it okay? We think maybe some folks might have some questions for you, either about the retaliation stuff that I mentioned before you called, or this stuff about the youth jail. I just wanted to give you an opportunity if you had anything else you wanted to say before folks ask questions.
No, I think I covered the main points. Feel free to ask any questions.
Okay, great. Do folks have questions for Lyle?
I have a question for Lyle.
Okay, go ahead.
Lyle, I'd love to hear about like why you decided to become a journalist and that decision, and then the early steps you had to take to make that possible.
I think the first step I had to take to make that possible was to ensure that I knew enough about writing and good grammar to get people to read my writing. So that meant practicing. I had an early blog for a while where my style was very formal. It sounded very much like I just got out of school, even though I'm still in school. They sounded closer to an essay that you'd submit for an English professor than anything somebody wants to read. So it took a little practice. Though I enjoy reading some fiction, I found that I had this skill set of telling a story and relating information and an interest in the policies that impact my life and that of my peers and millions of other people. So I wanted to find a way to join those two. And I didn't know when I first started writing and getting essays published that journalism would be what it is or would become. I just knew that people needed to know that there's more to what occurs inside of prisons and youth confinement facilities and within the criminal legal system than what is presented in newspapers or magazines and definitely TV shows. So I wanted to counter that narrative, and that's kind of where I put myself as countering that misinformation, that false narrative, that there are so many other perspectives than what is currently known about people who are incarcerated. My first publication, I think I guess I'd say, was the Marshall Project. I submitted an essay. It was severely chopped up by a staff writer. I did not appreciate that. But it helped me realize what it is I was pursuing. And it also made me reach out to other publications and see that the best way to get my voice out there for people to read more of my writing was not to be in one place, but to get published in as many places as I could. And that's what I began doing. Then it was the J Journal through the John J. College of Criminal Justice. Then it was Scalawag who began publishing my writing and continue publishing my writing and is still publishing my writing. And I am very grateful for that, because I also discovered that in addition to wanting to publish in as many places as possible, that it's good to have a home base, that it's good to have some solid backing of people who not only understand what it is you're trying to do, but support it. And that's when I began to really understand what it means to write from prison. That's nonfiction. That's about policy. That is critical of the system and of the people who attempt to write about that system from the outside. I discovered that this makes me a check and balance, and that is what journalism is, a check and balance against the powers that be. That's what the fourth estate means, and I wanted to be a part of that.
Thank you for that, Lyle. Aisha has a question for you. Aisha says, I'm so grateful that we get to hear from you today. Would love to know the books, articles, etc., that really shaped you as a journalist, and writers that you'd recommend that we'd read.
Okay, so the one that always jumps to mind is a book called Prisoners of Politics by Rachel Elise Barkow. She's a professor at NYU.
Cool.
I would also recommend Marie Gottschalk's Caught, The Prison State and the Lockdown of American Politics. And in terms of historical content, I would recommend Brian Jarvis's Cruel and Unusual: Punishment and U.S. Culture. And one final book that, if you're really determined to understand some of the philosophical underpinnings of punishment, would be Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish.
Yeah, cool. Brandy says, thank you for sharing these, Lyle. Do other folks have, oh, I want to actually put a plug in for one of Lyle's stories. That is one of, I think still one of his most popular ones on Scalawag. And it's called Life Without Parole: A Silent Execution. I think we have a link to it. In that article, I don't know, Lyle, if you want to say more about it, if your author is here, I don't need to describe it. If you want to say just a little bit about what your argument is there.
Sure, it's really fairly simple. It's kind of all in the title. Life without parole is a silent execution. It means that people who are sentenced to life imprisonment typically die in prison. There is this conceit amongst especially progressive politicians who believe that the best alternative to the death penalty is life imprisonment, only to essentially condemn people to die in prison anyway. It's out of sight and out of mind. And a lot of the things that occur to people who age and ultimately die in prison are just as horrific as anybody who dies on a gurney or in an electric chair or in a gas chamber or as Georgia and South Carolina will be doing here shortly in front of a firing squad. The difference is that the over 208,000 people who have been sentenced to die in prison aren't viewed as anyone who really needs help. Capital punishment is often the focus. Those people who are on death row, like myself and over 2,700 others in the United States, receive a lot of the attention because that's where the big focus is, because it's often more immediate. Our deaths are sought more frequently than, say, somebody who's sentenced to die in prison, because, well, once you put somebody in a cell, that's all there is that you need to do. The other unfortunate thing is that people who are sentenced to non-capital crimes no longer have legal representation after their direct appeal. And what that means is any opportunity that they might have to get relief from their life sentence or get a wrongful conviction overturned is drastically reduced from those who are sentenced to death.
Gotcha.
But that's the gist of the article, Life Without Parole is a Silent Execution.
Yeah, thank you so
You have
much. And
60 seconds remaining.
we've linked it in the chat. We had two final questions if you want to, but I think we only have time for like one. From Lucy asked if you feel
Well, I can call back if you like.
yeah, I think we're running. We got a final section. Well, Emily, what are you saying?
Yeah, I think Lyle should definitely call back and we
Okay,
can wrap up
go ahead.
questions
Okay, great.
since, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and call back. Sorry, I wasn't sure how much time we had, but yeah,
Okay.
go ahead
You
and call
have
back.
30 seconds remaining.
Okay.
Hold on a second.
The final section of our presentation we can go through quickly, and it also can be found in our guide. I want to give as much time with Lyle as possible since it's special we have him here.
Thanks everyone for your patience. This is, how this system works.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's like part of why we left those kind of automated messages and like even the pre-recorded parts, right? Is because that's just the reality of how talking with folks goes.
Yeah. Everyone can hear okay though, right? It seems like folks are hearing all right.
It
Right.
sounds great.
Great.
We've had lots of testing of
You have
the
a
phone
prepaid
call.
You'll not be charged for this call.
Yeah,
This call
for
is from
sure.
Lyle May.
an inmate at Central Prison. This call will be monitored and recorded for customer assistance, collection, or complaint procedures, or to block future calls. Dial 1-866-230-7761. To accept this call, press 5 now. To decline, thank you for using Global Tel Link.
Hello.
Okay. All right. Hey, Lyle, we're back. So we had two more questions for you. I don't know, and maybe more if other folks have them, but Lucy asked if you felt comfortable sharing, what are some of the most helpful ways that folks on the outside have supported you when you faced retaliation for your work as a journalist?
So the best way to support people who face retaliation for their writing is simply to check up on them. If for some reason I were to disappear after writing an article, both Danielle and Lovey know enough to say, call up to the prison and say, hey, we haven't heard from Lyle May. We'd like to know what his status is. Oftentimes, especially since everything is online now, the DPS website signals whether or not an incarcerated person has a status change. And by that, I mean it would let you actually know if I was on lockup. It would have a certain designation for that, but that's one way. Another way would be, of course, once either of them called up to the prison, and by the prison specifically, I mean the warden or the unit manager, and ask about my status. And if I was on lockup, they could probe and ask questions, because oftentimes it's enough for people on the outside to ask questions. And if they were unable to get an answer from anyone at the prison, then they could go up the bureaucratic chain to the regional director or the commissioner, if need be. And you keep asking questions and you keep knocking on doors, and eventually prison officials get the idea that there's somebody out there concerned about what's going on the inside. And that is generally enough for them to toe the line if they're doing something that they're not supposed to be. But even then, that's not always enough. For example, I wrote an article back in 2019 about some prison officials who took it upon themselves to try to end my access to higher education. And when I wrote about it, the DPS responded. They left a nice little message on the Scalawag website talking about they had restored my access to higher education. But it wasn't long after that I was, my cell was tossed. It was searched, stuff thrown around. And sometimes, it's something like that, a simple message like, we know what you're doing kind of situation. I've been fortunate that nothing too horrible has happened to me, but that also is a testament that the things that I write about are factual, and I am sure to back up the things that I write by sourcing the information, by letting people know that I'm not, just making things up. I use articles that have been previously published and add an insider's perspective. I cite academic books as a way of explaining more difficult concepts and showing the public that these policies are rooted in politics or thinking of particular criminologists. It's important in writing about prisons from the inside to make sure that information is backed up, not just by sources, but by having multiple copies, which is always why I make sure to, carbon copy the things that I write. But sometimes there's just not going to be too much that you can do from the outside, short of keeping up with what's occurring with a given situation. A worst case scenario, if, say, I were to be locked up on Unit 1, the solitary confinement unit, for writing a particular article, I would try my best to get a message out to Danielle or Lovey to explain what was going on and what I knew to be going on. And if they were not getting the right kind of responses from prison officials or were getting stonewalled, then that would probably be a time to get a lawyer involved. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to file a lawsuit. Sometimes it would be enough for a lawyer to call and say, hey, I'm a legal representative of Scalawag Magazine or the Intercept or whatever media outlet was representing me, and say, we'd like to know what it is you're doing with Lyle May on Unit 1. Why is he currently on lockup? We want to know why he's under investigation, and push come to shove, get FOIA requests.
Yeah, thank you for that. It was really, Lucy says, thank you so much, Lyle, for your valuable insight. I see one more, another question or hand raised. MJ, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you. Lyle, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it. I never thought about a FOIA request. My question was, do you have a network of folks on the inside who are also interested in writing or who are writing currently?
I wouldn't call it a network, because that's kind of a tricky word when you talk about people who are engaged in stuff on the inside. I know there are people who are incarcerated writers here who definitely like to get their work out there. on death row. I can't speak as much for the general population, but I don't doubt there are people out there who, want their voice heard, who want their perspective understood, and who would love nothing more than to see their words in print.
Yeah, thank you.
Do other folks have questions for Lyle? Lyle, do you have,
I
go ahead.
would like to follow up on that. Were you asking in particular because you're searching for more people? And if that's the case, then I could potentially give you some names of people who might be interested.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take some names, but the question was more so because I just started writing to 2 folks in Texas, and it's really early in relationship building. We've only had 2 letters back and forth, but I know one is an artist, and I don't know much about the other's hobbies, but I'm just thinking about like when it might be relevant to ask about story sharing or counter narrative sharing and what role I could play in that in the future for them. But yeah, I would be happy to have some names as well.
I think it would be just to, urge you to be upfront and let them know what it is you would like to do. Even though you're still relationship building, you let them come to the time where they say that they'll be ready to share stories and what stories they will share. And your purpose for wanting to do that. I think that's important to, to definitely be on the level. The issues in the past, there have been people from different organizations who have reached out and really just want tell-alls, the true crime stories that are nothing more than, basically popcorn reads for people who only believe one thing about people who are in prison anyway. So those are often the ones that immediately turn people off, and you'll have issues if that's what it is you're trying to do.
Yeah, I hear you. So it sounds like giving as much autonomy as possible and letting them have the reins of what to share, at what point to share it, and what you said what my purpose would be in helping them share it as well.
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Lyle.
No problem.
Other folks have questions? Or Lyle, if you have final thoughts.
Sure. I would just like to remind people, for anybody that is a journalist or an editor or representative of a particular media group, that there are a lot of people and a lot of experiences in prison that are not covered, that need to be, and will help the public better understand this thing that we call prison, and why it's maybe not the greatest idea in the world, why it's not going to solve crime, and why it's so problematic. I firmly believe that this is a whole world apart from the outside. It's why we call it the inside, and why it's so necessary to represent that narrative apart from the narratives that are often told about prisons and confinement facilities and youth detention centers and jails and what have you.
Awesome. Thank you. So there's a bunch of, you can't see it, there's a bunch of nodding happening on the Zoom. So thank you so much, Lyle. We really appreciate you taking the time today. And yeah, folks are been really happy to speak, to hear from you. There's a one quick question from the Ground Cover Viewing Pod, from folks from Ground Cover News, are asking if you know about Mumia Abu Jamal.
I know of him. I know he is incarcerated in Philadelphia. The last I heard, he'd actually caught COVID. I have read some of his work. I think I might have even heard him on NPR. I'm not entirely sure. I do know that he has reported for NPR before.
All right. Cool. Well, I think that wraps this part of the section, unless there's any final things that anyone, yeah, okay. A ground cover says, awesome, just wanted to make the connection. Thanks for your time today. Cool. Thank you so much, Lyle. We'll be in touch. We'll be in touch soon. And yeah, we appreciate you.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I always enjoy the opportunity to speak with people about prisons and the criminal legal system, and change some understanding about it. I encourage all of you to read Scalawag Magazine and look for my book that will be published by Haymarket in fall of 2023 called Witness, an insider's narrative of the carceral state.
Yeah, we're so looking forward to it. Really excited about it. And yeah, we will.
And
go ahead.
And Danielle wrote the foreword too. So.
Yeah, it was an honor to be asked. Cool. Well, thank you, Lyle. We appreciate you so much, and we'll share out we've already shared out all your stuff from Scalawag, and we'll be sharing with our larger network of folks, including folks today, once we get a link for your book and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Okay.
All right. Cool.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Take it easy.
All right, you too.
Thank you, Lyle.
All right. Bye. All right. Thank y'all so much. That wraps my portion or our portion of this segment, and I want to turn it over now to Lovey.
Yeah, I know we're running a little short on time. So like Emily said, a lot of the kind of nitty gritty that this next section is about, you can find in the guidebook, which I will send another link to download. But yeah, we just wanted to touch a little bit on, paying writers, especially. If you want to go to the next slide here for people to kind of soak in. So like something we talk about in the guidebook is the many ways that prisons create challenges to fairly compensating incarcerated folks, like monitoring, communications and looking for mentions of contractor work or whatever. And you can read about kind of how to work around that more in the guidebook. But I do want to touch on here about why paying folks is very much directly correlated to one of the biggest issues that we see in the industry about supporting work by incarcerated writers overall. We often see that people writing from prison are kind of pigeonholed into writing stories that fit kind of whatever space is available, like as an afterthought into, opinion columns or personal essays or other places that you might put, quote unquote, like non-objective, like non-hard news reported stories, right? And part of the purpose of this guide is arguing that it's our duty as editors and journalists to make sure that there are more spaces, that they're more abundant, that there are more places where those stories can fit in. And we think that's very much related to pay, because a lot of the times these opinion and personal essay spaces don't have as high, of a price tag as hard news reported stories. And what you would pay for any other piece of freelance writing, right? So with that in mind, this is a list that the folks at Empowerment Avenue were able to kind of gather of what folks had been paid for their work at different outlets. I can share that Scalawag's policy is to pay all writers the same, whatever type of work they're doing for us, wherever they come from. So, there's a range within that for personal essays and opinion, but up to, $1,200 for a reported piece across the board. But yeah, I know we're running short on time, so I want to pass it over to Emily to talk through some of this and other stuff that Empowerment Avenue's put together.
Yeah, one quick thing I'll add here is that personal essays and op-eds are often good first steps, and that's with a new writer, that's often what they're comfortable with. But if you stop there, it's not enough. So we really encourage editors and publications to, okay, maybe the op-ed is the first step, but how can you be like opening up pathways for more ambitious reporting from incarcerated writers? So let this be a first step and then go further from there. A big thing is just to be asking about payment early. It depends state by state, but some folks are not allowed to be paid. So it's a good idea to bring up this question very generally to see how they might be compensated, and be prepared that folks might direct you to an outside support network who might accept payment on their behalf or hold a bank account in their name. And that leads me to this. We have two options here. Writers, a surprising amount of incarcerated writers do have outside bank accounts. So payment is as simple as you would think it would be. You'd pay them as any freelance writer. Inside payment is possible. It's just a matter, again, of getting set up on the correct systems. And again, just asking folks what they need, how can you be paid, and sort of all being in line and being in line as soon as possible. So you're not scrambling and they're not waiting on a check. And Lovey, you want to talk about sourcing writers pretty quickly here?
Yeah, super quick. I'm just very mindful of the fact that there are more things that folks want to get to after this. But yeah, we've outlined a number of ways that you can get in touch with folks in the full guidebook as well. But, you know, things we have outlined on this slide here, you know, think locally, getting in touch with folks who are already in touch with incarcerated people is a great way to kind of have some of that legwork done and not be starting completely cold, right? Find incarcerated folks who have already written about a certain issue that you'd like to cover, either to commission more work from them or just to get in touch with them, build a relationship, see what's on their mind, you know, figure out kind of what the scope of your reporting from prison is going to look like. Get your mailing address out into prisons. We have a list in the guidebook of some publications that are circulated on the inside where you can place ads, you know, and then I think most importantly is putting someone in charge of actually reading and responding to things that you are fielding, and making that as dedicated a part of their job as possible, right? And so that it doesn't just become something of an afterthought or something that you get to when you get to. A lot of the communication issues here, you know, kind of exacerbate, you know, things that are time constraints and, you know, things like that. Like it needs to be kind of part of your practice, right? And I just dropped a ton of links into the chat. But if you go back to the guidebook, we've got links, we've got places to start, get in touch with Empowerment Avenue. And yeah, what else in our last minute?
Yeah, so obviously we just have a few minutes left, but we'll leave you with some takeaways, and we can stay a few extra minutes if folks have questions and want to keep talking. But here are suggestions to sort of dive into your own content in your newsroom and look at who's reporting this work and what the reporting looks like. I found even with progressive publications, they're still using the word inmate. They're not meaningfully including incarcerated folks. So there's always room for improvement, and know that your improvement is always going to come from system impacted folks. So if they're not there, you need them there. If you want to volunteer, you can always reach out to me. We look for volunteers at Empowerment Avenue to support our work. We have a list of other organizations here that are doing amazing work. There's more in the guidebook. And big thing, set up your infrastructure. As Lovey was saying, as far as communication, like I'll see an editor go halfway and like the incarcerated person like just doesn't have enough to reach back out, or they'll give their phone number but they haven't set up a phone account, so someone calls and they aren't able to connect. So just to have a holistic infrastructure that you're thinking about, it's going to be trial and error to get it set up in the right way. It's going to be kind of tough. Just keep going, deal with the issues, and you'll get a good system that you can have incarcerated people meaningfully connecting with you. And yeah, we are at the end here. I understand if folks have to leave. I'm happy to stay a few extra minutes. I'm not sure, Lovey and Danielle, what your schedules are, but we can take some questions or ideas from the participants if anyone has them. Oops. Maybe not, and we can, oh, I see hands raised. I don't have a view since I'm sharing my screen. I don't have the full view. If someone else wants to moderate questions.
I saw Lucy first, and then I don't know if it's Andrea or Andrea second. So maybe start with Lucy.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much just for such an informative and valuable training. I'm just like wondering, when you reach out to incarcerated journalists inside, especially if it's your first time, are there certain terms or things that you should avoid putting into your correspondence that would be likely to be red flagged?
That's a good question. I feel like it also depends on what system you're using to get in touch with folks. I know that just an anecdote from Lyle, he had been talking with a friend about something completely random via the tablets, and someone said, my diet's been shot to shit or something. And because it used the phrase shot, the message got flagged, right? So there's all sorts of stuff that doesn't make it through. I don't know. Emily, you might have more of a broad view.
Yeah, it's not against the rules for people to write and report from prison. So be strong in your conviction, and the writers you're working with are there for a reason. They've deeply thought through it. And so you're okay in that, reaching out and making those connections. I do try and be it's sort of testing what the department is going to start censoring. Every department is different. So you're just going to it's trial by error. One example that I'm coming up with, we're working with the National Writers Union to invite incarcerated writers into the union. And there was a one pager that someone had really wanted to frame it in an sort of abolitionist, like this is an abolitionist project. And I was like, yes, this is, and we can do that and talk about it through the relationship building. But my concern of like putting the abolition language in the one pager was it was going to get censored, and then the project would get shot down before we could even get started. So I think I'm always thinking, as far as organizing, especially abolitionist organizing, it's a long-term game, it's a long-term conversation, and you're building up to it as you kind of understand what's going to be censored or not. Danielle, did you have any thoughts?
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, both what you and Lovie said, Emily, like really resonates. I think, one of the things that I really encourage folks, and I know sometimes, folks are working, especially if you're working for a national outlet, you're not doing stuff that's super like local. But I strongly encourage folks to like go visit in person, right? They're just conversations that are actually a lot easier to have and a lot more comfortable for incarcerated writers to have when you have them in person, because it's not being recorded, right? In that way, right? It's not, you're being surveilled, right? But it's not, there is a level of privacy that's different, right? In person than it is over the phone or through, right, this new tablet messaging system that Lyle, like some people like Lyle are working through right now. And yeah, there are definitely things that I've been able to communicate, and Lyle has been able to communicate to me, right, in person that that like he would never say like on the phone. And that's so important, right? And especially if there's trouble or any of those sort of things. So that's a plug also for like really working locally, right? If you are in a state like the shitty thing is, right, is that there are people incarcerated in your state. So, prioritize reaching out to those folks and building relationships with them, because you'll be able to do so much more, right, than you can from a distance.
Andrea, did you have a question?
I do. And honestly, thank you so much for creating this space. I've never been in like a room of other people who do this work. And
Welcome.
This question may be outside the purview of this conversation. But okay, so I edit a publication, a large publication, specifically abolitionist and queer, and it goes to like 20K folks in prisons. The problem with this is it's just me. It's just me. And I have another job on top of that, like within the same organization. So I wrestle with, you know, I physically am unable to do a lot of these things that are like harm reduction, or like meaningful follow through. And like, at the end of the day, I can't decide if like this is useful as it is, or if it's actually harmful. Like I really want to work more with incarcerated writers, and I do in a kind of informal basis, but I don't have these structures that we're talking about. So I don't know, I guess I'm wondering what your opinion is, if you have any, or if this is something that any of you have worked through.
I mean, I'm assuming since the network is so large, you get a lot of volume. That, I mean, that's something I think everyone in this space is, there's so much, there's so many writers inside. They need so much support to get their work outside because of the infrastructure that exists. And there's not enough people doing the work. It's what I found. I mean, I do think if what we've wrestled with Empowerment Avenue, and how do we expand and how do we have impact and not burn out? And I think we've had to, at least for now, do what's manageable, like what we can have, where we can sort of not spread people too thin. And that means our cohort size is fairly small. But does that make me happy? No, it like bums me out that we don't have capacity to get to more people. I think there's also a lot of strength in networks that are large. It's not necessarily the one-on-one work, but it's getting the information to a lot of people. I'm interested in like, what's the organizing space between those two things? Can we be like talking and working together? And I'm sure that that's an exciting conversation to be had. To find that balance, because I think they're both important.
I'll say also, I'll plug our listserv again. I mean, we've got a list of a few hundred folks who are interested in doing this work, and occasionally there's funding opportunities, things like that come up there. I also have to hop off in a second, but appreciate us raising these limitations, because there are many.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. I see one last question from Ground Cover News.
Can you hear us okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. We're streaming or like screen sharing, so we weren't sure if things would be screwed up, but I have a question.
So I had the question, which actually I thought this session was going to be about to some degree, so let's say you're writing an article about some prison issue. Do you have any thoughts about how to get in touch with prisoners and get comments, which I know is really tricky? And actually I have I know that I worked with a situation where we actually had the lawyer get in touch with the person for us. But other than that, I mean, I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts?
I don't think you need to go through a lawyer, and you definitely should not be going through Department of Corrections.
Yeah.
Everyone incarcerated can be reached out to directly. You can search them online. Every state has ways to search.
Yeah.
You can write them a letter. A lot of folks are on JPay, and a direct outreach as you would do with any other source. It's just that you have to research how those people have a communication method. And, I'll also, I'm going to make a plug for you. It's very important for us as outside reporters to quote inside sources, but just in the spirit of this panel, I've been really trying to encourage outside reporters to think of co-reporting. And what it can look like to do research and reporting on the outside while having inside folks contribute reporting, and have that as a co-byline. You're going to get much more meaningful, nuanced, and impactful reporting than just quoting incarcerated people. It's just my 2 cents.
Thanks.
All right, I think we're a little, yeah, I think we should wrap. But thank you all so much. There's, yes, join the Press in Prison listserv, which is how we can continue this conversation and offer each other support. Reach out to Empowerment Avenue if you want to get in touch. I really thank you all for being here. Danielle and Lovey, any final thoughts?
One final thought, join the listserv for updates on this guidebook coming out in print at some point, maybe a little bit more accessible than the PDF.
Yeah, no, just thank y'all for sticking around and for really good questions. And yeah, looking forward to, we're all on the listserv, so when you reach out, we'll see you. Yeah, looking forward to connecting further.
Thank you all. Take care.
Much. Take care.
Bye.